When people ask me what LED LCD TV to buy, I usually recommend either Samsung or Sony for very good picture quality. But there is a new mini LED contender on the market right now, with higher native contrast than any Samsung or Sony LED LCD, as well as a local dimming algorithm that's good enough to give Samsung and Sony a run for their money. I am talking about the TCL C835 Mini LED TV with VA type LCD panel, full array local dimming, and quantum dot technology. With local dimming disabled, black level on our 65-inch TCL C835 review sample measured 0.016 candelas per square meter on a 4x4 ANSI checkerboard pattern after peak white was aligned to 120 nits, translating to a native contrast ratio of more than 7,000 to 1, which is higher than any Samsung or Sony LED LCD TV we've reviewed to date. And impressively, its viewing angles were not as narrow as some other VA-type LCD panels we've seen in the past, including from TCL CSOT themselves, so blacks remain fairly homogeneous across the screen. Using our own custom-authored test pattern, we counted 24 vertical columns and 12 horizontal rows, giving us a total of 288 independently dimmable zones. Overall, the C835's local dimming algorithm was a substantial improvement over previous TCL mini LED televisions we've tested. The algorithm prioritized deep blacks and blooming suppression over outright accuracy, so small bright elements would be dimmed down to keep blooming at bay, partially contributing to the circumferential vignetting seen on the rapidly expanding white circle in our own custom-authored ABL test pattern. When compared side by side against a Sony BVM HX310 mastering monitor, there was little to no crushing of shadow detail on the TCL C835, although its black floor was unsurprisingly brighter owing to transmissive LCD display technology. Perhaps more reassuringly, we barely saw any distracting luminance fluctuations across a variety of challenging scenes containing low APL and occasionally bright subtitles, such as in Gravity, The Revenant, and Sicario. Our preferred local dimming setting of high even for SDR delivered very high contrast enhancement, yet with virtually no blooming around the subtitles. In a pitch black room, the top and bottom letterbox bars didn't look jet black, but this algorithmic decision also meant that we rarely saw blooming from adjacent bright objects seeping into the letterbox bars. Of course, for darkroom critical viewing, not even the best mini LED TV can outperform an OLED whose pixels can be controlled individually in terms of luminance and colors, so it is probably fairer to compare the TCL C835 to Samsung and Sony LED LCDs. Unfortunately, we haven't received any of Samsung's and Sony's 2022 mini LED TVs for review, but based on previous models, we would say that TCL's approach sits somewhere in between the local dimming algorithms of these two famous TV brands, with more shadow detail than Samsung and less blooming than Sony. In the most accurate out-of-the-box picture preset, which is Movie Mode, grayscale veered towards the warm side, although this could be easily corrected using the supplied white balance controls. After calibration, SDR color accuracy measured well on a 10% window, with an average delta error of 1.22 and only two saturated colors exceeding the humanly perceptible inaccuracy threshold of delta error 3, translating to largely natural and cinematic colors in real-world content. The TCL C835 has a DDC or Direct Display Control setting to support Kalman AutoCal, but it isn't functional yet at the time we filmed this video in July 2022. Even with motion clarity disabled, the TV correctly performed 5.5 pull-down to present slow panning shots in 24 fps content without telescenic judder. The mild stutter inherent in 24p films was noticeably less obvious than on OLED TVs, so we saw little to no reason to engage motion smoothing when watching movies. For 50 fps broadcast content, news tickers and panning shots looked smooth without stuttering or frame drops as long as motion clarity was disabled. Should you choose to engage motion clarity, both blur reduction and judder reduction are zeroed by default in movie mode, requiring some user intervention to reduce motion blur. Increasing blur reduction to the maximum value of 10 would more than double motion resolution from the sample and hold baseline of 300 lines to 650 lines. To further improve motion resolution to 1080 lines, owners can engage the LED motion clear setting, which activates backlight scanning. As expected from this motion enhancement technology, the picture would become dimmer with some additional flicker, but at least TCL managed to sync it nicely with the source frame rate, so there's no additional judder in 24 FPS and 50 FPS content, even with LED motion clear enabled. Upscaling was a bit softer and noisier than A brands, but at least overscan can be disabled with standard definition content, unlike on Samsung televisions. In terms of video mode deinterlacing, jaggy suppression was very good, with only some jagged edges seen on the third bouncing bar in the HQV benchmark test pattern. Even though there's no film mode setting in the user menu, the TCL C835 correctly detected and processed 3.2 and 2.2 cadences in film-based interlaced material. Native 10-bit gradation was good except near black, which was presented in a blockier manner, similar to other TVs using a MediaTek HDMI 2.1 SoC without co-processor. Owners can use the Gradation Clear decontouring filter to reduce in-content polarization, although the high setting would erase too much fine detail. So if you absolutely have to engage Gradation Clear for non-pristine content, low is the setting we would recommend. The TCL C835's screen uniformity was subpar. Our 65-inch review sample manifested noticeable dirty screen effect or DSE and blotchiness at different tones as we cycle through full-field gray slides. While most movies contain enough textures to mask these uniformity issues, they would become visible during panning shots across a homogeneous background, such as during football or in this scene from the 4K Blu-ray of Arrival. For HDR, peak brightness on our TCL C835 review unit measured almost 1100 nits on a 10% window after calibration to D65 white point, and nearly 600 nits full fill. Combined with good local dimming, this translated to an impactful HDR presentation that surpassed any OLED TV in high APL scenes. DCI P3 color gamut coverage came in at 96% in UV terms, whereas Rec 2020 coverage was 79%, with the underlying spectral power distribution showing beautifully distinct red, green, and blue peaks typical of quantum dot technology. Like on Samsung TVs, the TCL C835 adapted its HDR10 tone curve according to maximum mastering display luminance or max MDL metadata, with accurate PQ EOTF tracking until roll-off. The C835 is equipped with a dynamic tone mapping function, but based on our testing in movie mode, it always overbrightened the HDR presentation compared to reference standards, regardless of whether it's a 1000 nit HDR content or if the title contains specular highlights up to 4000 nits. If you are interested in watching HDR movies in an accurate fashion, we would advise against enabling dynamic tone mapping on the TCL C835 in its current iteration. TCL is one of the few TV brands which support both Dolby Vision and HDR10+ dynamic metadata formats. During playback of Dolby Vision content, shadow detail appeared to be crushed, which was proven by measuring the C835's PQ EOTF tracking in the most accurate Dolby Vision dark picture mode. Next, gaming. But before that, I would like to thank Surfshark VPN for sponsoring this video. Since the pandemic started, some streaming providers, including Netflix, have throttled the bitrate of certain shows, especially in Europe, resulting in a softer picture with more compression artifacts. This is where a VPN comes in. Surfshark allows you to stream content from another country without needing you to be physically there, so you can watch Netflix at higher bit rates with better picture quality. You can also get more content that is not available in your region, perhaps the US Netflix library, which contains more movie titles. For less than the price of a Big Mac per month, you can use Surfshark on as many devices as you want in your household, all at the same time. There's 24/7 live customer support, a 30-day money-back guarantee, and if you use promo code HDTV test, you will get 82% off, as well as 3 extra months free. So sign up today and give Surfshark a try. I will put a link in the YouTube description below. Thanks again for your support. Okay, with game mode enabled, input lag measured 13.2 milliseconds at 60 frames per second, dropping to a super responsive 5.2 milliseconds at 120 frames per second. Even though there's a boost mode in the game bar overlay, engaging it did not seem to improve input lag compared with the default balance mode. Nevertheless, these figures are among the lowest for an LED LCD TV, ensuring a very responsive gaming experience, and there appeared to be less compromise in local dimming performance in game mode compared to Samsung Neo QLED Mini LED televisions. By default, the PQ-EOTF tracking in game mode was massively over-brightened, leading to a washed-out HDR presentation and clipping of bright highlight detail. The HGIG toggle in the game bar overlay didn't seem to work correctly either. However, engaging dynamic tone mapping in game mode, which would also disable HGIG, seemed to result in accurate PQ-EOTF tracking. In this footage from Dirt 5, which is an HGIG-compliant game, you can see that enabling dynamic tone mapping would recover more specular highlight detail than with dynamic tone mapping off. VRR worked well, with the pendulum test from an NVIDIA RTX 3090 graphics card looking smooth and free of tearing, although just like on Sony TVs with a similar MediaTek chipset, activating VRR would lock the TCL C835 into game mode. VRR flicker remained present in certain games, especially during more sedate scenes and on static menus, suggesting that this problem is not exclusive to OLED at all. Native 10-bit gradation in game mode was good even at 4K 120Hz, with no jarring posterization on this display HDR test pattern or in the skies of Microsoft Flight Simulator. We are pleased to see the TCL C835 pass full 4K 120Hz resolution despite using a MediaTek HDMI 2.1 SoC similar to the one implemented on the troubled Sony XH90 or X900H. Out of 4 HDMI ports, 2 are HDMI 2.1, each supporting the full HDMI 2.1 bandwidth of 48 gigabits per second, with a VRR range of 48Hz to 120Hz, which can be expanded to 24Hz to 120Hz using LFC or low frame rate compensation. By the way, this is probably the most comprehensive edit we've seen on a consumer television, filling in every inch of space possible, which is just the sort of thing I would do. Interestingly, somehow TCL managed to migrate eARC functionality to one of the 4K 60Hz HDMI 2.0 port on the C835, thus truly freeing up 2 HDMI 2.1 ports for those intending to use eARC. Note that at 4K 120Hz resolution, the TCL C835 failed to resolve full 444 chroma, so fine text from a PC would appear slightly jumbled. Also, despite being advertised as capable of 4K 144Hz, we failed to achieve 4K 144Hz resolution on our TCL C835 review sample from an NVIDIA RTX 3090 graphics card. TCL is aware and is working hard to address this issue with a forthcoming firmware update. Due to limitations of the MediaTek chipset, Dolby Vision gaming from the Xbox Series X was capped at 4K 60Hz. Otherwise, we couldn't seem to enable the Game Master option, which entailed going through the Google TV interface, thus limiting its usefulness. Also, when connected to a game console with boost mode, the local dimming setting seemed to have gone missing from the picture menu, even though local dimming was clearly still active. Design-wise, the screen is supported on a central rectangular tabletop stand with brushed metallic finish. Being a full-array local dimming mini-LED LCD, the C835's chassis is understandably thicker than OLED's, but at least TCL has made an effort to slim down the bezel when viewed from the front. We like the anti-glare coating on the TCL C835. It's glossy and so doesn't dilute contrast. It mutes reflections fairly well, yet doesn't exhibit rainbow reflections seen on some higher-end Samsung and Sony LED LCDs with viewing angle compensation filter. At the back of the television, you can find the Onkyo sound system, which includes a 30-watt woofer, making the C835 one of the better-sounding televisions we've heard, with impressive bass and volume, although the highs could be a bit shrill at times. The Google TV interface was sleek and responsive, providing access to a comprehensive array of streaming apps such as Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, Disney+, Apple TV, and YouTube. However, to unlock the full Google TV experience, TCL is currently forcing users to create a TCL account to log in. Otherwise, you'll be restricted to a basic interface with no way to install additional apps from the Google Play Store. We have complained to TCL about this hard-handed practice, and the company has promised to issue a firmware update in the very near future, which will let users skip the TCL account login procedure. Let's sum up. Besides carrying a VA-type LCD panel with higher native contrast ratio than any Samsung or Sony LED LCD television we've measured, the C83 comfortably has the best local dimming algorithm we've seen from TCL, delivering impressive blacks, minimal blooming, and barely any distracting backlight fluctuations. The TCL C83's main shortcoming is mediocre screen uniformity, at least on our review sample. Upscaling and motion interpolation are also not as refined as those found on A brands. Despite these flaws, we think that with a launch price of only £1,400 for the 65-inch version, the TCL C83 represents outstanding value for money. Among 65-inch 2022 TVs, no OLED can come close to this price at launch. Casting our eyes towards competing LED LCD televisions, the 65-inch Sony X90K is more expensive at £1,800. We expect the Sony to have better color accuracy, upscaling, and motion handling, but it doesn't use mini-LED backlighting, leading to less dimming zones and likely more blooming than the TCL. The 65-inch Samsung Q8TV is pricier. It's not a Neo QLED and therefore not a mini-LED television, and uses an ADS panel with lower contrast ratio. Because TCL doesn't have a self-emissive display in its TV lineup yet, there's a very strong incentive for the company to keep improving mini-LED LCD technology, unlike most other TV brands which have since shifted focus to OLED. As a result, consumers can benefit from a high price-performance ratio thanks to TCL CSOT's vertical integration, exemplified by the TCL C83, which receives our recommended Best Value Award. And for the first time in ages, UK models will have the same specifications as European models, not a gimped version. The performance of the C83 makes me even more excited for the flagship TCL C93, which I've covered in this video you can watch by clicking here.